It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. The guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted weekly from a kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. My name's Lewis and I'm the host. And we're up to episode 26 this week, which means that I'm halfway through my initial projection of wanting to do at least a year of shows. I'll get to 52 shows and I'll see where I go from there. This week's guest definitely falls into the passionate about what they do category, also definitely falls into the raconteur category, as is evidenced by the quite robust and quick-fire conversation we had with each other. Initially colleague and now dear friend from work, a senior lecturer in journalism at AUT, Mr. Greg Treadwell, soon to be doctor. And move into those hallowed halls. A quick intro today because I kind of ranted on last week and realised I said the same thing 3 or 4 times over. The pressures of time, lots on outside of this hobby at the minute, especially speaking of AUT, with work. Because the students are about to finish for the year, which means there's lots of marking and admin and running about, and I'm also trying to submit an article because you have to publish in this role as well. Even though I'm on a teaching contract, I'm trying to get a few publications up my sleeve before that contract ends, because who knows what happens next? Who knows? What wasn't mentioned in the episode that I found interesting about Greg's background is that not only a love of words in terms of getting correct information to people, and a love of the craft and trade and occupation and lifestyle of journalists, but his master's is in poetry and a focus on a New Zealand poet. A love of the English language across the styles, methinks. Okay. After I critiqued the audio quality of some podcasts that I listened to last week, funnily enough, there's some choppy bits in this episode. You might not notice them because I don't like to edit a lot of these episodes, but I had to pull some tiny bits out because we lost whole words, but it's because my computer settings changed. A ghost changed my computer settings. So every time the screen went dead, and I'd wobble the mouse to see how we were going time-wise in this app, it seems that when the screen powers up, that would cause some sort of CPU overload on this pedal-driven computer from 1947, it would appear. But they're so minor. If I hadn't even mentioned them, you probably wouldn't notice them. But if you do hear a couple of choppy bits and go, ooh, I wonder what he cut out there. I wonder what they said there. Nothing that exciting, just broken words that I wanted to include because the overall sentiment had to stay. We chat shock jocks versus a new term I come up with, which Greg refuses to take any credit for, which is the repulsion jock, related to a certain person who gets a lot of airtime on New Zealand in the New Zealand media. We discuss that Treadwell article from the spin-off. Mr. Grieve gets you mentioned as well, the editor of the spin-off. Hello, Duncan, if you listen to this. He's going to come in at some stage as well and chat as well. But then we just chat, we kind of get under the hood of journalism, and I ask a bunch of questions that hopefully will be the sort of questions you'd ask as well, and the sort of things you'd like to know about sort of how it all works with information flow and ethics and all sorts of things, really. So enjoy. Like me on Twitter at Verbal Highs. On Facebook, you can type in Dr. Tennant's and I should come up, or look for at Verbal Highs Podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes, like and rate there. All this liking, rating, and clicking keeps me going, and apparently it might lead this hobby somewhere. It's nice to see new people, I don't know, popping up every week at the moment, owing to the sort of range of guests I'm getting. And I'm getting some lovely feedback. Don't be afraid to get in touch. Everyone likes a bit of feedback, constructive, positive, and so on. You can get me verbalhighs@gmail.com. Okay, on with the show.
This is Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs.
And you've got a nice timbre.
Have I?
To your voice. Yeah.
Have I? A nice timbre.
You just gave me the glad eye almost.
Timbre.
Yeah. Natural compression.
I suppose.
I used to do voice work for quite good money.
Why don't you do that as a sideline?
I don't know why. It was late 90s. I disappeared overseas. I haven't really thought about it since I've been back. But that was student radio days, and that was when Mikey was king up here. And I don't know if you remember when suddenly like the youth market became this huge thing to sell in the 90s.
Yeah, totally.
So I think the style of delivery I did, I should try again. I don't know. I should try again. I'm saying that maybe the market's changed.
Isn't it? It's quite good
crazy money. I remember even in it must have been 97 or 98, I still remember the script. I had to go in and say, get going and get your student application form in now, or something like that. So that's a really short script. And I think they got me to read it 10 different ways. And then they phoned me back and they said, we've accepted 4 of them. Can you invoice us $400 for each of them? So that's $1,600 for, I think it was about 40 minutes of work all up. Yeah. And that's, 20 years ago?
Yeah, but you don't get a gig every day, I guess.
No, it was in conjunction with other extraordinarily low-paid work. Like presenting a breakfast show on a student radio station. It was amazing, though. And that's how I met a lot of the people who are on this podcast, Gregory.
Okay. So,
we'll get started.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we have started.
We have started, really, yeah.
My guest today is a senior journalism lecturer at AUT, a former journalist, though still writes. Well, we shouldn't say former, really,
Yeah, I am a journalist. I like to think of myself as a journalist, but in fact, when it goes down on the immigration form or whatever, it's lecturer. But I don't know that you can be a journalism lecturer without still being a journalist, and I am still publishing, so...
Yeah, publishing, not in the academic sense too, in the journalistic sense.
In both, yeah.
And my travel experience changed markedly when I went from bar manager to lecturer on my immigration form. I'm not kidding. I was turned over twice. Apparently New Zealand immigration are quite full on a global scale, obviously not compared to the States, but yeah, when I lived in Melbourne, I'm properly turned over here twice. Suitcases opened. Do people take drugs in your bar? All this kind of ridiculous kind of psycho...
barman got you in trouble.
No, bar manager. Yeah,
manager, but lecturer gets you waved through.
I haven't had that since. Yeah,
right, yeah. I don't put journalist.
Yeah, why?
Because you're automatically suspected of something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody quite knows what to accuse you of,
That's
but
so
they do
weird,
know that you're a bad person.
Yeah. But then some would say it's one of the most noble professions, but
yeah, indeed.
It's written for the, I can't read that now, Whakatane Beacon.
Yep.
I've been a journalist for the Otago Daily Times.
Yep.
Editor of Waihaki's Golf News.
Yep.
And originally trained as a journalist in the early 1980s. Welcome, good Mr. Treadwell.
Well, thank you very much for having me along, Lewis. It's a great honour. Yeah, I did journalism training when I was 17 years old because that's what you did then.
Yeah.
And then fell in and out of it over the years. Have also had a very long periods of my career as a barman, gardener, various other things. But then in my early 40s, and this I hope is encouraging for people who are in their early 40s and wondering what the hell to do with their lives.
Yeah.
I didn't really find the job that I was really good at till I was in my early 40s, and the job that I really felt comfortable in, and this is me.
Teaching.
Teaching at a university.
And you won an award for teaching.
I did. After a couple of years, I get a lot of really, really positive student feedback, and my colleagues nominated me for an Excellence in Teaching Award, and I won it. And I have to say, it was worth going through. It was a long process. We had to present to the Vice-Chancellor and all that shit.
Oh, really? Do they still have that award?
Yep. In fact, nominations are open now, Lewis.
Who can nominate? Who can students nominate?
I think colleagues have to nominate.
Oh, that's crazy. Students should be able to nominate. I've never had a colleague in my classroom.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. I don't know how that works.
So back to that interests me. Like I wasn't going to mention that having sort of toddled off and done bar work and because I've a similar trajectory, and you sort of never know how these things pan out. Was it just that there wasn't always? Because it's funny, we were just talking about that. I went from probably an ideal job for me straight out of uni, which was I'd been hanging out at Radioactive so long that they finally wanted a paid host and. Low money, like I said, and stuff, but, a lot of great things came of it. But also I think my head got extraordinarily large, and so I didn't fall into something ideal, and then I sort of ended up doing hospo a lot on and off over the years. Why did you end up bartending as well as
because it
journalisting?
was a job that would take you around the world, and I did a lot of travel in my 20s, and that's basically why I ended up in bars and stuff, because, I've worked, I like to say I worked at Cambridge University in England, but I didn't. I worked in a public bar.
In Cambridge or near Cambridge.
Yeah.
So your thing was more that you were just a bohemian at the time?
I guess so. I was a backpacker, 1980s Kiwi backpacker, perhaps not the classic Kiwi backpacker, but certainly a long-distance traveller. I was away for 4.5 years on that trip, left with 400 New Zealand dollars and came back with 400 New Zealand dollars.
Well, that's quite well done.
Yeah, I thought it was good. 4.5 years, yeah. It was quite good.
And so journalism just not a career easy to transfer between countries?
Love the job. Struggle to get work in England.
Yeah. Is that because, like a lot of things in England, there's a sort of an old boys network?
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Even the journos over there that I knew were pleased to hear from me, but couldn't help. It wasn't, I don't think you land on your feet as a journalist in New Zealand and they go, oh, you're from New Zealand, you work hard. Here, work at the BBC. It doesn't quite work like that. But having said that, Kiwis are in the English media, all throughout the media. It just wasn't my thing. So I kept moving and ended up just travelling for years and years and came back and went to university to do it properly. And did 5 straight years from my mid-20s to my 30s. And if there's anything I can advise you listeners is go to university a bit later. I think it's so good for everybody. You and I, you've just completed your doctorate. I'm still just finishing mine. Yeah. We're old fucks. But this is the best.
You're significantly older than me.
I'm significantly older than you. But I think this is the time of life to really let your brain go. Really let the edges go and just let your brain do what it wants. And I guess I would say don't ever stop studying. Journalism is a great career, but not a very well paid one. Yeah. So I had been in this amazing journalism job for 7 years on Waiheke Island, where I still live. And it came to its natural conclusion, the way jobs do. And I looked around, and there was a job going at AUT, which was the progenitor of AUT was ATI, and that's where I trained.
Auckland Technical Institute?
Yeah.
Before we became Auckland University of Technology University?
That's exactly right. And even before that was Selwyn Technical College. But
really?
Yeah. But I went to ATI in 1980 and trained as a journalist. It was a 6-month boiler course, pot boiler course, so high pressure, 6 months.
And it was a trade, similar to
it was
panel beating?
Absolutely a trade, like panel beating or a craft like macrame, really. Yeah. Stitching together a news story is actually not very different from stitching together a, macrame pot.
So by that logic, so everyone learns this sort of, you're saying something that's formulaic and you can sort of put together like that sort of, what is it, the triangle of importance and so on, and how, when, why. Exactly. But then from there it's the people who actually have are good with a pen, essentially, that end up writing the features back in those days. Because if you couldn't write, and you still got to be able to write to do long form stuff. Yeah, you do, and yet there is still the long form journalism, the writing skills involved in that start with short form journalism. And some, I'm not saying that nobody can go straight from outside journalism straight to being a great long form feature writer. Yeah. The best way to create a feature writer is to start them at news in their 20s and let them do features in their 30s. They've got the discipline of a journalistic writer by that stage, and even when you start to relax your writing muscle, and you allow a bit of colour and a bit of opinion in, because you've been given the right to write a feature, not just a news story, you can still get that completely wrong if you're not careful. So it isn't just about doing what you want anymore, it's just about releasing your creativity just a little bit. And that's what students struggle with sometimes. What do you mean releasing your creativity?
Well, because, as you said, it's a news story is a formulaic thing, and there's a very clear structure to it. So then when people move on to feature, and a news story can be anywhere from 200 to 800 words, but then you start moving on to a feature from 1,000 to 5,000 words, and people think they can now be creative because they've got more room.
Do you think, I had Kirsty Johnston in here, and
Kirsty's amazing.
Yeah, I saw her at a free event at Gold Dawn. She's someone I essentially cold called, and she came on, which I thought was great. But she pointed out something that made total sense when she said it, because I've always thought this with becoming a lawyer. I think a lot of people go, initially when they go to law school, it's like, I'm going to be like in A Few Good Men. I want to be a criminal lawyer. I want to defend, that sort of that the classic sort of film criminal lawyer. And she put it to me that she thinks a lot of people get into journalism thinking that's what I'm going to be, because I'm going to be that long form kind of romantic
There's
cigarette hanging out of the mouth. You know,
there tends to be two visions of journalism for young people. So I'm in this first camp. People who were good at English didn't know what to do with their lives, did journalism. And in fact, I remember my best mate at school saying, "What are you going to do?" "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, I can see you up late at night, cigarette hanging out your mouth, half a bottle of whiskey, writing the lead for tomorrow's paper, you know."
Ding!
Ding! And so the romanticism caught me, and I thought, that sounds like quite a good idea. But the other sort of person, the other sort of person is the person who does have originally, and I was too young to really. I guess I've always been a political creature, but I didn't have very strong politics when I got into journalism. But what happens over the years is you begin to understand politics. Even though you're not a particularly political person, you're not a member of a party or pushing an ideology. But nevertheless, you begin to understand politics as a journalist. And in the end, you are... in the end, you're hoping that your work is going to improve the world in some small way. A whole lot of other people get into it because they want to be Superman.
And how many...
Kirsty is Superman.
That's part of the reason I had her on as well.
She's amazing.
They're especially in this modern media climate that we all bang on about all the time, to be in a actual, established team of funded and supported investigative journalists. What's that expressed as a percentage in New Zealand?
Well, I know,
but she's and that's totally her. It's her skill and her hard work and so on.
But I mean, you can pick up your phone and turn on the Herald app, and you'll see some piece of shit from news.com.au or something from the Daily Mail or whatever. And the Herald app gives the Herald a bad name. But can I? What
do you mean? Because it spits up all those cat stories first and
that's
stuff.
Right. That's exactly right. But I've never known the Herald. And I've been watching the Herald since I was 17. I've never known the Herald to have such a strong team of investigative reporters as it has now. It has Jared Savage, who leads the investigations unit, David Fisher, Kirsty Johnson, Liv Carville, and a couple of others.
But like you
Matt
say,
Nipper. These are incredible journalists.
Like you say, try and find any of those names in the first couple of scrolls on the. But then, as Kirsty said, she said, "Well, it's you guys that are clicking on it all." And there's something in that as well. Like in the morning, if it's the first thing that comes up, I'm sitting there with my coffee, and I go. I go, click, and I read it, I go,
I know.
I shouldn't have done that.
I shouldn't have. Why? Somehow we feel like clicking.
And then I go, that butter's nowhere as big as it said the headlines said it would be.
Or how about the video? The video really annoys me. You click on the video and you've got to sit through some shitty ad, and then it's just some nonsense video, and it's, I don't know, I'm not...
Do you think there's something in that, Greg, that there is, especially as I joked to you about in the car on the way over? Well, it's not a joke, actually. There's a lot of armchair experts around now in the days of the internet. Do you think the audience have to take some responsibility for... Because what I'm getting at now is we're not in a traditional broadcast or print if you call it analogous to broadcast, kind of one-to-many delivery system. Surely audiences have to dig a bit deeper and...
I don't know that when the internet was invented, the audience said, "Okay, I'll take my responsibility for my little bit of making this work properly for democratic reasons."
Well, that's the original inventors of the internet intended that, though. You're well aware of that, I'm sure.
But then the money people got hold of it, didn't they? And it's not going to be that democratising influence that some people hoped. Having said that, it is a democratising influence just by the number of people who communicate. And while a lot of rubbish on it, there's a lot of stuff that isn't rubbish on the internet. So what was your question again? Armchair experts.
No.
Does the audience have to take some responsibility?
Not so much about the expert thing. I'm sorry, I might have led you astray there. I was meaning more about what we choose to consume and click on and so on. Because what I was getting at with the Herald is you've got that great team there and so on, but as you say, commerce dictates. So you actually have to burrow a bit further and find that stuff in the morning with your coffee.
I remember one of them. I interviewed one of those people, and I can't say which ones because it was for my PhD, and so it was sort of supposed to be confidential.
Okay.
But they said that...
this is going straight to the ethics committee after this.
That they had done a 6-piece investigation that, when they finally got it published, was on the website for 40 minutes.
What?
And so Well, on the front page of the website for 40 minutes.
So it's still there, but it's kind of buried.
But it's buried, you know. So you can understand the frustration of some of those investigative reporters when their work doesn't get the airing it needs.
Yeah.
But the public is sort of a bit more in control now. In fact, I had a master's student who did a very interesting project, which was comparing what journalists put up on the website, on the A News website, and what people click on A News website. And he found the correlation between that was very, very strong. We can't prove causality.
Yeah.
So, but the audience is influencing journalists, and journalists are influencing audience, and outside this is real news values.
Which, if we can, I think with just the internet in general, that we are how would I put it in terms of if it were, like in terms of its impact on humanity, we're so early into it. We're all still trying to figure this all out. Everyone kind of involved. I think what you expressed is actually could be really super positive. That's amazing. An audience and producers kind of influencing and working in tandem or whatever. But it's all just too new and weird at the moment.
It is, and it's also just so desperately commercialised that ultimately the objective everybody's trying to get to is that content can be paid for, particularly news content, by the people who read it. But of course, we let the cat out of the bag in the 90s. Journalists put all their content for free on the internet, and
as far back as the 90s. What do you mean? Where?
Oh well, in the mid to late 90s, news started going up online,
right?
And it was sort of at that moment when there was a sort of evangelism around internet news and how it was going to be the future and so on. And of course it is, but what we got wrong was that advertising would stay with news organisations, and it didn't. So if you want to sell a bicycle, you don't need to go to nzherald.co.nz, you go to bicyclesforsale.com. Whereas you used to put a $5 classy in the paper, right? So online there is almost no money for journalism, and yet audiences are online expecting it for free because we gave it to them for free, and they won't start paying for it now. A small number will. We see the paywalls at the New York Times working. But
New Zealanders, I think, are particular. I'm going to be a little racist here, but our Scottish heritage,
want shit for
our
free.
Scottish heritage,
we do. We really want shit for free.
New York Times is probably the only. Well, it is. It's not probably, because I know exactly. It's the only media outlet I pay. Actually, Netflix and stuff. But we're talking journalism and press today. That's the one I. That's the one I pay.
So you actually pay for the Times? Yeah. So
I read, and you know what?
And I read my 10 free ones per month.
Well, you know what?
And then I flick over to the Washington Post till the next month comes along, and I can go back to the Times.
You know what? There's this thing called private browsing. I've heard it's used for pornography mainly, but
I've never heard of it.
No, right. So apparently that's the way right behind the New York Times paywall, because it doesn't know your IP address. Yeah.
Is that using DuckDuckGo or something?
No. You just hit private browsing on your browser, and it just doesn't know that you. It just doesn't know who you are. I would have thought the New York Times had a way around that. But anyway, I do pay.
Good for you, Lewis. I think that's great, and I would encourage all those people out there to start paying just a little bit for their journalism, because if people will go back.
But then am I supporting offshore? Oh, God.
I don't know. Well, who's charging you here apart from the NBR? And you don't strike me as an NBR reader.
No. Occasionally an article will come by my way and I'll read it.
Yeah, sure. But I would have thought that, if the Herald put up a paywall, that you might be somebody who'd pay a little bit to get their best stories. No?
I'm not sure. Look, I don't know.
What do you think about this?
There's just something. Maybe I'm just being an elitist twat, and there's something about saying, "I subscribe to the New York Times."
Well,
but the articles are friggin' great to read.
They're really good.
They
are really good. But the reason that the New York Times can actually get away with having a paywall is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
That people, it's part of their identity. Same with the NBR.
Yeah,
it's part of your identity, and the Times of London.
Nothing like a craft yogurt and a peruse through the New York Times online in the morning.
That's right, exactly.
So back to the 1980s and journalism, and this is such a broad question that could go so many ways, which is intended. There's the obvious online thing, but what's changed in terms of information? Process.
I don't think there's any doubt that news has become, even out of the influence of the internet, cheap and cheerful compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
So, but I have to be careful not to paint the picture of it all being terribly earnest, serious, democratically significant news before, and now being terribly trite, unimportant stuff. Because some people paint it like that, and it's not quite fair.
Well, also, I don't want all kind of dry
right.
balls. It's like when we try and teach
life is too rich to spend your whole life reading news.
Last year for MediaCom, I made that very clear. We launched straight in with first years with this idea of the public sphere, and if you sell it the wrong way, it does sound like a very dreary kind of black and white British newsreader.
You've got to. Even back when there was no internet and we were just publishing news in newspapers, and yes, there was radio and TV, and they did the same thing. To be honest, there was always a brightener. Right, so people get onto the Herald website now and they complain because there's a bit of cheap and cheerful content about somebody's boob size or something.
Yeah.
Well, it is more cheap and cheerful than it used to be, but we always used to have brighteners, and I would urge listeners to cast their minds back to Judy Bailey and the news at 6 o'clock in good old New Zealand before the internet.
Yeah.
And you would always have a final story about a dog that could serve for somebody who jumped out of a
giraffe born at the zoo.
A giraffe at the zoo or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, and you put it perfectly just before. In a politically perfect world, people would spend their whole lives glued to the news for democratically significant information that might help them decide who to vote for. But the reality of life...
Parliamentary TV would rate through the roof.
Oh, parliamentary TV would rate through the roof, exactly. But the truth is that people only have a small part of their lives available for news and politics and democratically significant information. So we've always had to insert those brighteners in there to not bore the pants off them. And those of us who are terribly serious about news and teaching journalism, I've got to be one of those people. I can't bear the brightness. I can't bear the boob stories. I can't. But I sort of understand that most working Kiwis have got a little bit of time for news and a little bit of time for
But you wouldn't just read hard news all the time. You must. Yeah,
pretty much.
Okay. Well, I guess someone in your position that would.
I don't end up on Vice.com very often. I don't end up on.
People are talking about how I hear lots of people, actually, number of different ages, actually, because I don't know if a lot of people, especially, for example, our younger students, because it makes sense because of their age, know that Vice has actually been around, well, since the very late 90s, but I remember it from the early 2000s via the magazine in Melbourne, which used to be free.
Yep.
People are talking about how it's amazing journalism. What do you think about Vice?
I read a really good story on it this morning, actually.
Yeah.
But what do I think about Vice? I think there's a market for that sexy, that edgy, a little bit after dark kind of reader.
Yeah.
I've had students file stories on sexual fetishes, and Vice has come back.
But they've done stuff like going to war zones. And
Totally.
But I'm saying with all of that, are they? I'm not hugely intimate with Vice.
I'm not either.
But as far as you can see,
as far as I can see,
here in this world, are they? You probably know what I'm about to ask. Are they following journalistic protocol? Because I watch them doing stuff like that, and I haven't paid a huge amount of attention. But I'm like, are they? Is it spectacle, or are they actually doing serious?
No, I think the stuff that I've read is solid.
Yeah.
That's what you need from journalism. You need it to be solid. You need it to not have any cracks in it.
Yeah.
So even if they're coming from a particular angle, I can read a right-wing newspaper or a left-wing newspaper or a sort of pop culture publication like Vice, and I can tell you whether it's good journalism or bad, and that's nothing to do with the story, the angle, what they're trying to do.
No, absolutely.
It's just about whether they've actually got a story that stands up.
A story that stands up that I guess, the main thing would be that all information and facts kind of check out to begin with.
Yes, that. Yeah. And then secondly, and perhaps more importantly even, it leaves no unanswered questions.
Wow, that's quite a large...
It doesn't mean that you know everything when you write the story, but your reader doesn't...
We're talking... We must be talking sort of features here, not like you said, beat journalism and stuff. So everything.
Any journalism mustn't leave you with unanswered questions.
Yeah.
So if it raises questions...
Man, I'm going to take that with me from today, because I do a bit of writing, so there you go.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the things that, as I said before, if you want to end up a fantastic feature writer or a long-form political writer like... Robert Fisk or somebody,
Yeah.
then you need to start with news, because you need to learn how to write like that,
Yeah.
and then you can expand that into long form. And the thing that and in some ways it's so easy to see in a short form story, like a 10-paragraph news story, where there's a hole.
Yeah.
And so if there's a hole, if you've got a question that isn't answered in there, then the job's not done yet.
Do you live a life of...
It drives me nuts.
yeah.
Drives
oh
me
my gosh.
freaking nuts.
You're getting these questions before I...
Every news story I read, I am assessing for...
Yeah.
I can't help it. And
you see holes everywhere, from the New York Times down to the...
no, not usually. Because that's good journalism, and good journalism won't have those holes.
But you regularly see holes.
Oh, yeah. In the odd thing, you'll see a hole, you go, well, why don't I know that as a reader?
Yeah.
That's been raised but not answered.
Right.
So you left me with questions, and a news story isn't meant to leave you with questions, it's meant to give you information, not questions. It's meant to answer questions.
So I was saying, back to what's sort of changed since the 1980s.
Photography?
And you mentioned there's more lighter content.
There's much more lighter content, yep.
And you think that's whether or not there was the internet, that was a trend that was occurring?
Yes, there was always light content.
Yeah,
there was always light content, and that, some people would call sport light content. I would. I love sport, but it's not. It's not make or break stuff,
Oh, you reminded me. I want to get to Duncan Grieve later on, because I only just learnt that he is a massive sports writer as well. Is there anything that man doesn't do? Photography. What's changed there? Well, obviously print became colour, so that was maybe the first reason you mentioned photography.
Photography is one of the big changes that I'm very interested in, and I'm a little bit worried by. I think that the expression that photojournalists can have with pictures is at risk. I think we have a much, much smaller part of our news landscape is by professional photojournalists, and I don't just mean the blurring of edges between mainstream and social media, and therefore all these selfies and low-quality pictures come in from the public all the time, and they come into news organisations who are suffering financially and therefore are really quite happy to take slightly lower quality pictures, but relatively free. Low cost images from the public are much more advantageous to the bean counters. But what happens in the end is we begin to lose one of the great arts of journalism. We do, and I don't want photojournalists out there to be grinding their teeth at me. I know there's still good photojournalists out there. I'm going to the Canon Media Award.
Well, I don't think that doesn't strike me as what you were saying. I think you were saying there's less opportunity for them. Well,
there's less opportunity, but a whole lot have been fired. And
that sounds like less opportunity.
The whole lot have been fired, and
it's because of that budgetary thing that I can get it easy.
Absolutely. And there's no shortage of images, are there? There's no shortage of images in the media today, but they're not paying great photojournalists so often to take them. They're giving reporters iPhones. The Chicago Sun-Tribune.
Really?
Yeah,
it's amazing.
About 5 years ago, the Chicago Sun-Tribune, which was...
So not even a good point-and-shoot digital camera?
No.
Not even a step down from an SLR, just an iPhone?
John C. White, who is one of the greatest photojournalists alive today and took photos for the Chicago Sun-Tribune, got sacked along with all his colleagues one day. They just turned up to work and they were told, no, there's no more illustrations department. We've given all the reporters iPhones to take pictures with. And he said, look, I understand, but you can't capture the subtleties of life with a snapshot.
No.
And
you can't. I remember as a child, my grandparents had this, I don't know what era it was, but they had this, what do you call it, like a compendium or a hardcover book of Life magazine photos.
Oh, Life.
And I just went through that so many times as a kid, just, you know, really famous shots, like the guy with the, I think he's in front of a jet engine or whatever, and his mouth's all... that photos like that, like really iconic.
They're iconic of the time. What is going to be
and the depth, the style, the person who knows the exact moment to take that shot.
Well, Life magazine, of course, was perhaps the ultimate of the publisher of pictures during what we call the golden age of photojournalism, which was about 1930 through to about 1955.
Why is that the golden age?
Essentially, the invention of the 35mm SLR camera, and which meant that you could carry a small but highly effective camera with you everywhere. The invention of flash photography in 1920, colour photography in 1928, flash photography in 1927. All these things just changed it, and then photography, and we suddenly had these wonderful decades of incredibly great photojournalism, and it isn't hard. to find those pictures if you want to have a look on the web. Google.
So no, go on. Google, close that one off. Sorry.
Google 10 photos that changed the world, and and
one of them would be the young girl running from
Kim Phuc. Yeah, that's an amazing photo. I'm sure listeners will know about that one. That's the young Vietnamese girl running from the black clouds of napalm behind her.
Facebook's bots. No, actually, Facebook's humans.
Yes.
Because Facebook's policed by its audience. Some people think, a machine goes through and, whatever, looks for nipples or whatever it is. But someone actually has to report your images. And so a human, you've heard about this, it sounds like you're saying yes.
Yeah, I think
Someone got that photo removed, and it was actually a journalist who posted it with a really interesting, commentary, something to do with the image. I'm not sure of the details and so on. Very weird when you look through some of the sort of images that the people post up of themselves and so on, that something like that would be removed because she had no clothes on.
She was 8 years old.
It feels offensive just saying it.
She was 8 years old.
Yeah.
She had no clothes on because
they'd burnt off.
Or they'd been ripped off her by people who were trying to stop the napalm boiling on her skin.
Oh, boy.
But actually there's a reasonably happy end to that story. So the photographer was a Vietnamese guy called Nick Ut, and he didn't, as many Western journalists are accused of just fly in, take the photos, fly out. That's called parachute journalism. He was a Vietnamese photojournalist, and so he went back when she was 10 or 11 and found her, and there's a lovely picture of them together, and then he went and he followed her all the way, and she's now in her mid-50s, married with kids, living in Canada with a reasonably happy life, I think. So that picture, although it represents, man's inhumanity to man is always a story. Man's inhumanity to children has got to be a story.
Totally. The parachute journalism things interest me because, and I get it, but it sounds to me you're implying in the profession or the lifestyle or commitment, whatever you want to call it, that there has to be some deeper level of engagement with the subject or the story. Because I'm thinking a counter argument to that could be, well, I'm doing my job, I get in, I get out. Yeah. Don't worry, I'm right there with you. But I
don't have a particularly strong feeling about this. The criticism of parachute journalism comes from locals, basically. So, for example, the tsunami 2004, New Zealand needs some sort of information from this event, so it sends a journalist. And I'm making this up. I don't know who went.
No, I get it. Totally get it now. You're saying it. So they're in this huge.
But what the locals see
is someone coming in and getting some disaster porn and then taking off.
Yep. But also not having been there long enough to get it right.
Right, so not getting the nuance, not talking to that second person, that third person.
Exactly. And one of the worst examples of it, and I think the New Zealand media woke up to how they're capable of doing this themselves when the Australians did it to us in Pike River, when the miners were trapped in Pike River and media came over from Australia. They were brutish. They laughed about the Hicktown mayor.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And so he was just trying to do the best he could, this mayor.
I can't remember if he was the mayor or the local police sergeant or whatever. But
he said, "Oh, that's unfair."
That's right, yeah. and so the Australians gave us a really good example of parachute journalism. So we do have to be a little conscious of that. But what are you going to do? You're a journalist. You're sent to a disaster and you've got 48 hours to get the pictures and the story, and you've got to get it back, and you just do the best you can do. But it's a criticism of journalism and the way it's set up. You can't send somebody over to... We just don't have the finances, don't have the resources to send somebody to a disaster for a month.
But then at the same time, ideally, and there are bad people in every profession, but there is, to me, there's an ethic, not to me, to anyone who knows even a little bit about journalism, there's an ethical code that comes with that role, and I guess if you are adhering to that role and considering it, then you would know as a journalist when you're being exploitative and when you're not. Sometimes you might need other people to let you know that, but you see what I'm getting at? I think you'd know if you're taking the piss, basically.
I think you do, and I guess this is what I'm trying to say, is it isn't necessarily the journalist's personal compass has gone wrong. It might just be, as I said, be back in 48 hours. So whatever. What are you going to do? You don't have the time to... but I think it's important.
You got a couple of newborn kids at home and all the other stuff going on in your life,
and maybe you go back later and check out how your sources are getting on. I hope journalists do that, because it's a little bit. People do give journalists their stories, and when they give them their story in a particularly sensitive painful stories around disaster, you've sort of given yourself a little bit to the journalist, and they've gone off, if you want to put it cruelly, they've gone off to make money with it. I mean, no journalist makes a lot of money, but they do get paid for their work. So in a way, you're getting paid for getting somebody else's painful story. You should go back to that person. And I think that journalists are learning more and more about the ethical requirements beyond the publication of the story.
But then it comes back to, it's a well-worn topic, discussions of contemporary journalism and stuff. As again, I'm still keep playing devil's advocate with this topic. But,
yeah, good.
But there's, we've already talked about the budget and time constraints these days above. So it gets to, I guess, maybe 15 years ago, many more had that luxury to kind of go back and
absolutely.
follow up and
ethics.
And da-da-da-da-da-da. But, if, hey, I'm running around and hello, I've got an iPhone and I don't have a photographer anymore, so I've got a photography job. I've got a writing job. I've got boss A breathing down my neck to finish that thing yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All that's absolutely true.
So how do you sell this to our students?
I think being a journalist is 24-hour ethical conundrum.
Yeah.
I just think being a journalist is you're
exciting
always,
though, right?
It's the best job in the world.
Yeah,
why did I give it up? Because I did in the end.
You haven't given it up.
Well, I haven't given it up, but I'm not chasing fire engines anymore. And I was for many years chasing fire engines and doing local politics and doing education and doing health and environment and all sorts
What I
of
haven't told you folks, I forgot that vital detail, folks. Greg Treadwell is a dog. Just to contextualise that fire engine chasing reference. So what were we saying?
So I was so good at chasing fire engines that the firemen... I don't want to get any of them in trouble here, but
Where are we in Dunedin?
I can't tell you.
Oh.
Normally we would be held... The reporters would be held back beyond the red tape with the public, at a fire. But I got so good at it, the firemen could trust me, and I used to go in on their shoulders, not into the burning building, but close enough to get really nice, good, close pictures of stuff. And that's the advantage of that. That's not parachute journalism. That's spending years in a community working as a journalist till the firemen know you and trust you. They also know you're going to do your job.
Yeah.
You're not going to make anything easy on them in the paper.
Yeah.
But they trust you.
It's integrity we talked about.
It's integrity.
Yeah.
You can write a story that's really critical of somebody, and they can have no problem with it.
Yeah. This whole photojournalism thing, you just alluded to what I was going to ask about is, so you've obviously done photojournalism as well as... Yeah,
how
does one fall into both? Do we train for both in our degree? Or
I run a third-year paper called
Right.
Photojournalism, which is a mostly practical course in how to take news photos.
Yeah.
I think, just going back a little bit to what I was saying before about handing reporters cameras, whether they're decent cameras or iPhones...
Yeah.
We are now in a situation where increasingly photos are taken by what I call camera-carrying reporters, and that's different to a photojournalist. So
that's what I was joking about before.
Yeah, so a photojournalist is somebody who exclusively works with images.
Yeah.
A camera-carrying reporter is somebody who's got the camera because they fired the photojournalists. Or they're a smaller, or as it was in my case, it's such a small news organisation that it can't really afford photojournalists, so it just expects its reporters to take photos. Now,
so that's how you...
And that's how I became a news photographer.
That sounds exactly how it's the same reason as why I can do three quite distinct roles in radio fairly well. As I was at a place that had very little money. Great place to start.
It's a great place to learn, and I encourage all young journalists to go off to under-resourced community newspapers to work for at least a while, because it teaches you how to do everything. It teaches you how to do everything fast.
Yeah.
It teaches you to rely on yourself.
It teaches you how all the components work together.
So
you just stay in one specialist field all your life.
Yep. So when I was in my last newspaper job, which was 7 years, I did reporting, sub-editing, photography, layout, proofing, printing, driving the paper around the shops on occasion.
Vacuuming. Filling the water cooler.
Yeah, pretty much, and I don't know, I have to admit, when I came to academia, I sort of expected everybody around me to have that same can-do, jump in, get your boots dirty attitude to life. But, and some do.
I was going to say, we've got to stop that one there pretty shortly.
Oh, no, I work with the most wonderful people, but they're just there's nothing like, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's nothing like a small organisation to give you multiple skills.
Yeah, there's a great saying that encompasses all of that. It's going to be the second thing I forget in less than 5 minutes. Not necessity, something breeds... ring a bell?
Familiarity breeds contempt?
No, that's nothing to do with being under-resourced.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
I think that was the one.
I think it was.
You were talking about the awards
yes,
way back. So you...
Which awards?
Well, I don't know. Because
the ones
you
I
said
won.
Awards. Well, no. The ones you were talking about, you sit on a panel for some media awards.
Every year I judge, and I've just done it for this year, the Community Involvement Award for the New Zealand Community Newspapers Association. So the vast majority of our city newspapers these days are city community papers. Eastern Courier, Western Leader type papers are owned by Fairfax.
Yeah.
Some are owned by Allied Press, who also own the Otago Daily Times. The vast majority are owned by the big players of the city newspapers.
Yeah.
But out there on the islands of the Gulf, there are 2 newspapers out there on the Hauraki Gulf. In fact, sorry, my
Greg
apologies.
lives on the Waihaki Island.
I do.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 newspapers out there in the Hauraki Gulf.
Really?
Yeah.
So Waihaki's paper?
We've got
Gulf News?
We've got 2 weekly political papers.
On Waihaki?
Yep. One Weekender, which is aimed at the visitor market. Great Barrier has its own newspaper.
How many people live on Waihaki Island these days?
About 9,000 to 10,000 permanent residents over
So
winter.
you got a paper per 2,500
We
people?
had 3 newspapers at one point.
Oh, I thought you said you had 4 now, so you got 3.
No, we got 3 now, but only 2 of them are competing
Yeah.
on a weekly basis for local news.
Yeah.
The third one is owned by one of them, owned by Gulf News. It's called the Waihaki Weekender, and that's just for visitors at the weekend with lots of advertising.
Yeah,
real
yeah,
estate,
what's on.
features about the vineyards.
Great advertising opportunity.
Great advertising.
I'm sure it does very well.
It does quite well with real estate.
It's exactly the sort of place you pick something up physical.
Exactly. On the ferry. It's where you pick up a hard copy. So
totally.
These community newspapers, despite the internet, are doing okay.
I was going to ask you about that.
Out there.
Yeah.
Gulf News has been there since 1973.
Yeah.
It's a robust, feisty, politically motivated newspaper that defends the island against the mainland hordes.
Yeah.
But all around the country there are these little newspapers that aren't owned by Fairfax, and they make up the New Zealand Community Newspapers Association. Mountain Scene in Queenstown, Whakatane Beacon on the east coast. There's all sorts of them. And I judge the Community Involvement Award each year. So
you're saying only with the independent ones, not with the...
that's right.
So the one that turns up here would be owned by
Fairfax.
Fairfax, I'm guessing.
Where are you? Central Leader, I would think?
Yeah, it's not up to much cop. I save it because when I wash my shoes, newsprint's good to stuff the shoe with.
I have to light the fire with something.
Yeah.
I think that the inner city community papers are much, much smaller than they used to be because the advertising's fallen away.
Yeah.
Whereas smaller communities in more rural areas, they feed their local paper with advertising much better because they're the local businesses who want to connect with local people, and they don't see the internet as being that local space.
No, totally. But I also think you hit the nail on the head. Necessity-wise, aside from advertising, just information-wise, it doesn't. This area doesn't really scream out for a voice agitating for it, but it totally makes sense that Queenstown have an independent paper reporting, on shit that's happening, basically.
Absolutely, and they've got some fascinating issues down there. Queenstown's got the most appalling health services. I mean, that's going to change because Queenstown's being yuppified, isn't it?
Yeah, so I know through friends that police activity down there has been questioned a lot of times through the paper, where no one else would have done it.
It's a stroppy paper, and it asks why pregnant mums from Queenstown have to drive to Invercargill for a scan.
So it's agitating for its community, which is what a good paper should do.
Advocacy journalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
and who's won the last few years?
The Community Involvement Award.
Yeah.
Well, this year I can't say. It's gone. Hasn't been announced. Who won it last year? The Devonport Flagstaff is always there in the finalists. Wow. It often wins it.
Yeah.
Editor is a guy called Rob Drent, incredibly hardworking journalist.
Yeah.
still sees Devonport as a community with an identity that needs protecting, therefore...
Well, I think it does. When you're in Devonport, you're in Devonport.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's the end of the peninsula, isn't it? And
that's right. One of the oldest pubs I've ever...
that's right. I mean, it's also now a highly expensive Auckland inner city suburb, but it's still got its character, it's still got its colour.
Name one not expensive Auckland inner city suburb.
Kingsland?
I think the houses around here would be a few million each.
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't know. I live in Waiheke. I hate you.
Hey, let's talk...
I used to live in
Let's talk about... So, obviously, it's granted everyone who gets through a degree, fantastic and good on them. But let's do a little luxury chatting on this podcast. Let's talk about some of the people that have come through our degree or postgrad program that are real kind of leading lights in journalism now.
Duncan Grieve. So you mentioned Duncan before, and he is a very, very highly respected journalist. He's the founding editor of spinoff.co.nz.
So guys, I do have overseas listeners. For people listening, if you haven't checked out the Spinoff, spinoff.co.nz, you definitely wouldn't call it a news site. It's an opinion-based site based around news. They have done some investigative journalism, but it doesn't report daily news. It's sort of commentary and pop culture.
That's right. Yeah. So he started it because Duncan was one of the first students I ever taught, and I don't take any credit for how amazing he is. In fact, I only taught him for a few weeks.
Some of his turns of phrase have actually, I've gut laughed at.
No, he's absolutely brilliant. But he was already brilliant. He was in his 20s when I met him. He was...
he had a baby very young. So he's got a background a lot of people wouldn't guess.
So when Duncan was doing his graduate diploma in journalism at AUT in 2005... He was going home after class to a 3-year-old for whom he was a solo dad. I mean, I think mum was in the picture, but I think he had to provide a lot of himself for the child as well as do this very challenging study. And I think that is an example of... I mean, Duncan, I think nothing phases Duncan. He works hard. I'm not saying it's all easy for him, but he's... And now he's the editor of this fast-growing, very popular, left-leaning pop culture website. He started it with a particular... Duncan always had a particular fascination with television.
I don't think he'd necessarily be left-leaning, but the publication is, Anyway...
Well, I don't know. What does left mean these days?
His quote was that he never voted for a party that had lost.
What a dick.
He's going to listen to this when he sees your name.
That's all right. That's okay.
People are...
Now, Duncan is...
See, everyone gets along until you start mentioning politics.
No, I don't know what he meant by that. But Duncan...
Well, I think I do.
But Duncan had a particular fascination with television, and he actually started it as a television and entertainment website.
Yeah, that's right. He likes to write funny stuff about TV.
Yeah, with a big add-on of sports, because that's his other love.
Yeah.
But slowly...
There's no sports on the Spinoff.
There was.
Oh, wasn't there?
When they started, there definitely was. But what's happened is there's such a need for a decent political commentary website in Auckland or in New Zealand. I think it sort of started attracting content.
It started attracting some of the. It started attracting people like Braunius and so on who probably don't need the work.
Steve Braunius writes for Tim. Tim Murphy writes for it. Tim Murphy, of course, is also part of this new website called newsroom.co.nz with Mark Jennings, formerly of TV3. There's a number of new startups happening, but the Spinoff is the one that's really got a whole lot of young people. I mean, I think they started... stories about Chloe Swarbrick, and all of a sudden,
Yeah, I really, really, really like that. This didn't come up before. Something we were talking about. I was going to touch on that. That was to do with politics or something to do with maybe young people and. I can't remember the context, but anyway, the point I was going to make is that I understand why in this media environment that's so saturated with so many different things to look at and see and do, that a lot of our younger people, students, that come through our degree and stuff, I can see why they don't really relate to engaging with that process of kind of essentially following old men and then voting for them. Yeah. And I think things like the Spinoff and things like Chloe Swarbrick, it feels to me like, and it comes back to what I was saying about we're new to this new system of audience and that it feels like young people are getting more of a voice than they perhaps have had in the past.
Yep, and that can only be a good thing. And I think that eventually those... I don't know, what is a millennial? I've never been quite sure.
They seem really nice. What are you? You were Gen X?
I don't know. I was born in 1963. I could be the very last baby boomer.
Because you know what I really like? Because I just sit there and I go, this is the media to me in terms of generations. I go, fuck up about millennials, fuck up about baby boomers, and I go, God, I'm glad I'm a Generation X. I'm just being left alone in all of this. Yeah. You know?
So when's Gen X?
We're the ones who actually were given no opportunity. We're the ones... No, just kidding. I think it's... it must be... I mean, it's grunge. It's
you had to pay for your uni. It's grunge.
Yeah, but it wasn't... I don't think it was as much as now. I reckon I'm on the cusp, so I'm 76.
Yeah, I
reckon it might... I think depending on where you read, it might be 75 or 80 to...
I've always thought of myself not as Gen X, but somewhere sort of just before Gen X. I don't know.
You know, someone gave me the great test. This is the Gen X test. Do you have an opinion about grunge?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're Gen X. So coming back to the spin-off, Chris Cornell died last night. Do you know who that is?
Well,
okay.
I sort of.
That's the second test. That's the second question.
I have to be honest that I'm not a big. I don't know much about him, but I saw the headlines this morning and checked it out. He was the lead singer with
Soundgarden and played at the first
That's
big out that
definitely
came
Gen
to New
X,
Zealand.
isn't it?
Yeah. So just with the spin-off, one piece, and I'm probably woefully behind now because there's so much content going up now. Good on them. But one that I remember talking to you about it at work that quite sort of rattled me because we're not used to it in New Zealand was the piece that went up about Andrew Tidball.
Don't get me sued.
Why? How?
It was a very challenging piece. I'm very happy to talk about it.
I really want to talk about it. And the reason why I was talking about it
is
because this is what happened. Is a lot of my my smart friends and so on. There was debate about the ethics of publishing it. There was debates about whether it was exploitative journalism. And
I remember of the women.
Sorry,
who
not
were
exploitative. Sorry, I've got the wrong word there.
But
basically, I think what I'm trying to get at is I think people were so not used to reading a piece like that.
That's right.
That there was all this really, warranted commentary.
Yep.
But I think it was just people trying to figure out.
Yep. Where does this sit? Where does this journalism sit? I know what must have gone through the editor's mind.
So talk about it. What's your take on it? As your kind of expertise and so on.
So I've been a number of cases in my journalistic career where I wrote a story either by a journalist who wants to write it and they bring it to me as the editor and am I interested, or by a member of the public who's got a story they want me to write about, and I can't count the number of times that they have centred around an individual and their appalling behaviour. Whether that's the sort of stuff.
Hearsay isn't.
For a start, so there's a few things that go through your head as a journalist when you get one of these stories brought to you about how awful somebody is.
Yeah.
First of all, is this not better for the police?
Second, is it a vendetta?
Well, secondly,
am I dealing with crazy? Is this actually crazy town here I'm dealing with?
Yeah.
And the other one's fine?
How do I give this person right of reply?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Well, you have to give somebody right of reply.
Yeah.
How do I make this? Is this really in the public interest, or is this one person's vendetta against another person?
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful about that. And these are the ethical issues. This is even before you get to the legal issues of defamation, because to defame somebody, I just have to say, on a public forum, like probably your podcast, Lewis Tennant, you're a bit of a nerd.
Yeah.
Right? Now, in Lewis's community, because they all think he's super cool, being a nerd is like not cool.
Yeah.
So I've lowered your reputation in your community. Yeah. I've defamed you.
I think nerds are cool now.
Yeah, look, it is. But do you know what I mean? You can lower somebody's reputation very easily.
Yes.
You don't actually have to call them a criminal or something.
Yeah.
You can lower somebody's reputation just by saying they make bad decisions.
Yeah.
So you have to be so careful.
Yeah.
Now, you have a defence, truth.
Yeah.
So this editor would have looked at this story, would have looked at the women who are complaining, and they would have said, do I have proof that this is true? Because if I get sued for defamation, it's not up to the person suing me to prove it's untrue. It's up to me to prove what I published is true. That's the only way the defence...
So, in other words, you've got to be rock solid, which makes complete sense.
Totally. You've got to be 100%... So
they would have had lawyers involved before they published that?
They definitely would have run it past a lawyer. Yep, definitely.
I just remember the bit that... the bit where I wondered about all these sorts of things we've been discussing was from memory, and I could have this wrong, the sort of the bit that dealt with the actual partner rather than the weirdness that went on with the 13-year-old girl online. The one, do you remember the actual partner that lived with him who said that he'd forced himself on her and so on?
I don't remember the details.
Okay, well, I just wondered how something like that would be. How is that publishable if it's not proven, or if it's not been through a court of law? I'm not. Well, I don't have to say this. I'm not trying to stick up for the guy here. I'm trying to just dissect the story.
Yeah, totally.
Because it was a lot. It was a lot to take in terms of how it was approached.
Very complex, and only somebody who can hold as many thoughts in their head at one time as somebody like Duncan Green could publish that.
Yeah,
I don't think I would have had not the courage, but the capacity to know that this was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But
sorry,
Duncan
other questions
doesn't make decisions lightly. He's
granted. But that's important to me, and I probably sent you in a different direction there again. So you're going to explain that, So this happened to me in a private home. I'm going to speak out about this to a journalist 2 years later.
Yep.
How can journalists, back to everything we said, is this other person of sound mind? Da 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 da.
Yep. So, but defence isn't the only. Truth isn't the only defence to a charge of defamation. So. There are other things, and honestly held opinion is one. So if you had very good reason for believing it's true, and you did enough to confirm
you being the journalist.
Yep. And the person who told you.
Yeah.
But they can be sued for defamation, but you don't have to have said it to be sued if you published it. You don't have to be the person who said Lewis is a nerd.
Yeah.
You could be the person who published it, and you're up for being sued.
Right.
So it's not just the person who said it. The reporter doesn't have a defence of, hey, it wasn't me. He said it. I just wrote what he said.
Right. And so the other thing that interests me there is the right of reply. How was Andrew Treadwell given right of reply, and what does that mean in a journalistic sense?
So ethical codes tend to give a reasonable amount of flexibility on this.
Yeah.
If somebody won't answer your phone call, it doesn't kill the story. So say I've got, just to continue the silly example, Lewis, I've talked to somebody who says Lewis is a nerd, and I say, well, actually, I think he's quite cool, today. But I'm going to publish what you said.
Yeah.
Damn you. I'll better give Lewis a call and see if he wants his right of reply. You know that I'm onto a story, so you don't answer your phone because you think that will make it an unbalanced story and therefore kill the story.
No, it's because I'm watching Doctor Who back to
It's because you're watching Doctor Who. But I can't. You can't do that to me as a source. You can't just refuse to take my call. Therefore, my stories...
So I lost my right of reply.
You lost your right of reply.
Yeah.
However, if you were to ring me the next day and say, you published this about me, well, I tried to call you, Mr. Tennant. I left a message, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's put your side of the view in tomorrow's paper.
Right.
So that's that. You can't stop somebody who's been criticised having their say, but it doesn't have to be in the same story.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And so to me, the ultimate...
The Broadcasting Standards Authority calls it the period of interest of the story. So, if
there's a legal sort of period, gestation,
or whether the judge decides that this. So, if I write the story today, I can't come back to you in a year and say, "Now's your time for a right of reply." Public's not interested anymore. Not enough people will see it to balance the criticism.
And then, would it be fair for me to say, it was just too simplistic, that to me, the article, the response to the article, kind of proved his guilt in that he's just completely disappeared, and he's not responded or got police or courts involved or had anyone investigate it. He's just gone.
We will all have our views about that, but that
You mean about that particular article?
No, I mean about some source disappearing and not giving you right of reply is not proof of guilt.
No, but he's disappeared from the music scene. He's disappeared from Facebook.
Still not proof of guilt?
No, it's not.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
If something like that, I'd be fighting if it were me and my name.
It might be just easier to move countries.
Oh boy! Well, then I hope it was all. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. It's very curious. Other students that are non-spin-offing but have gone on to do quite extraordinary things. Journalism.
The gorgeous Christopher Chang.
I don't know who that is.
Chris Chang is a TV One breakfast reporter.
Yeah.
Very high-class television journalist.
Yeah.
Fantastic on television. Snapped up by TV, and that doesn't often happen.
So if someone wants to be in front of the camera doing TV journalism, do they do a co-joint screen journalism degree?
No,
with
we
you?
have a television journalism paper for the third years. So that we have a radio paper, and then that leads into a start with audio and then move to video.
Yeah.
We try not to call them radio and television these days because so much of it is going to be online by the
screen
time
and audio.
Yeah, screen studies, the television major's now called.
Yeah.
So we have Duncan Garner.
Was he? Did you teach him?
I didn't before my time.
He'd have to be my age or a bit older.
He was an AUT student.
Yeah.
Matt Nippert, and I have to be careful here because Matt doesn't like it when we claim him as a former student, because the truth is Matt was so good he didn't even need to finish the degree or the graduate diploma that he was doing. The listener just sort of leaned over at AUT and plucked him out of the course and said,
"Wow,
come work for us, boy." And so he did. He went straight to the listener, and then he has had just an extraordinary career as an investigative reporter since.
I had a guy named Sam in 2012 in a first-year paper that I thought, I think you got charisma, and he's on One News now in the evenings, but I don't know whether he went through...
Sam, married to Rosie.
Who's Rosie?
Sam and Rosie were two journalism students of ours.
Sam part Māori guy?
No,
different Sam.
Actually different Sam.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing.
I know who you mean, though.
Yeah.
He's amazing. He's
good.
such a nice
Sam
guy.
Evans, I think it is. Sam Evans? No, that's a friend of mine. Sorry, Sam, if you're listening, different Sam. Sam something, seen him on One News in the debonair black One News jacket. Don't know, did he do journalism, did he?
Yep, he did. Yep, definitely.
Sounds like a blimmin' good major, people.
Well, I think it is a good major, given that the media isn't exactly the most attractive place to go and work anymore.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of people who understand the need for professional communicators, despite the fact that everybody out there with an IP address is a publisher, everybody out there with an opinion is a publisher, everybody out there, with a Facebook account is a publisher, and yet there is still a need for professional communication, and professional communication that is in some way accountable for what it does to wider society.
But professional communication that involves transmitting truth, not professional communication that involves massaging truth.
That's right. Yeah,
and
exactly. And truth is, what does that mean today? What does truth mean today?
Oh goodness, that's another whole episode.
Of course it is. You couldn't do it in an episode.
Some rolled up cups of tea.
But we still have to have...
What is truth, Greg?
I know, but we still have to have common ground so that as a society we can discuss with the same, at least reasonably similar to reference, the stuff that matters to all of us.
I pictured the guy we talked about at the beginning, the trope, sitting there with his typewriter, cigarette, half scotch, 2 a.m, one line at the top of the page, what is truth? Question mark.
Still unemployed.
I heard Zane Lowe went through as well, but I'm not sure about that. Now, probably one of the biggest known, radio, audio DJs in the world on BBC. No, he's on Apple iRadio, whatever it's called now.
Lucy Hocking.
Who's that?
Lucy Hocking was a good...
Come forward.
Sorry. A young Kiwi.
Getting too relaxed.
Yep. Young Kiwi journo who did our course and then went off to England, and she ended up as one of the presenter stars on BBC World. She's absolutely incredible.
No mean feat, as we talked about earlier, doing that bridge from sort of New Zealand to somewhere like the Beeb.
Yeah, that's right. But then Lucy was just one of those people who just... Some people just have a television personality, don't they? And I don't necessarily mean a Mike Hosking.
Yeah.
I just mean just somebody who understands how to communicate with their eyes. Basically.
Where did Hosking train anywhere? Did he go to? Did he go to radio school somewhere or something? Or?
I don't know. I have heard him say before, "I'm not a journalist."
It's good that he's so self-aware.
Yeah, but I can't accept
he's not.
that.
He's not though. He's a I don't think he's a TV presenter.
Yeah, I know, but he still has more time in front of the public of New Zealand. Yeah. So a senior colleague of mine did a quick back of the matchbox maths and worked out that Mike Hosking has about 60 hours a month in front of the New Zealand public, and that's much more than the Prime Minister.
That's obscene. So he's in a real position of power.
Well, he's in a... it's hard to know...
Who's watching him?
Who's
watching him on TV1?
Oh, Middle New Zealand. New Zealand.
Where are they? I guess I live in a bubble. I work at a university in Auckland, and I live in Kingsland. So
I live on Waiheke.
Yeah,
I don't turn our TV doesn't
but
go
why
on
would
until
they
maybe
not,
10 p.m.
But why would they not? But then he flaunts this kind of Auckland rich guy thing. So why wouldn't Middle New Zealand be repulsed by him?
I don't know.
I don't get the numbers.
I don't get them either. I really don't get them either.
There's only 400 people meters in New Zealand measuring the tally. Maybe they've just got it all horribly wrong, and 19 people are watching him.
Maybe. But then there is something, and you'd know more about this than me, but there is something about the shock jock that can be the most repulsive sort of... And I'm not saying that about Mike Hosking. I don't personally watch him, but
I think to me a shock jock's more like, if you go, again, for a classic trope, it'd be like it's like the Howard Stern or the big kind of boomy rock station DJ, and they're shock, but their listeners love that shock. It's the idea is that it's other people, it's conservatives, it's and it's sometimes slightly sexist or racist or whatever. But to me, that's a different. Do you know what I mean? That's a different kind of shock to actually going. The shock's different to repulsion. You want to get the repulsion jock,
the vomit jock. I'm not talking about Mike Hosking.
Well, so you just called him a repulsion jock. No, I did.
You did. I've been very careful.
I think, I'm too quick to dismiss new things these days. Point I'm getting to is that coveted 7 p.m. slot. And I've been internalising a really complex situation, and I think that they're onto the right thing on TV3. You know why? Because they're not presenting those kind of soft news stories or kind of put together pieces like they're doing on 7 Sharp. They're actually commenting on news and having a bit of fun with it. And to me, doesn't that represent the kind of newer generation and the way we get our news now? And that they've already seen it all by then. Yeah. So doesn't it make sense to have people kind of...
There's no point in breaking a story.
What do you think? What do you think of it? Yeah,
there's no point in breaking a story.
Have you watched it? I mean, I haven't. I've watched
which
maybe
one, which one? What's it called?
With Jesse and the TV3 7 p.m. one now.
Yeah, it changed several times recently.
Well, it's a panel now, and it's got comedians on it. It's got Jesse. It's got that really talented woman that used to host The Weather, which is it's great. She's moved on from that because she's the anchor on this, and it's kind of funny and throwaway, but smart and analytical at the same time. But like you say, it doesn't bother.
Breaking a story.
Doesn't bother. I think it's just called. It's not called Story. That was what the old one was called.
That's why I can't tell
it's a format that was bought off Australia, and they've made it Kiwi. Anyway, I reckon you should take a look, because as I say, I've definitely been guilty before of just anything in that slot's going to be crap. Because I mean, historically, it has been. It has been. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Maybe I should have a look and get back to you on that. I don't tend to watch television until about late night. I haven't got.
Oh, and I put stuff like that on occasionally because I feel like
you got to stay in touch.
Well, teaching media comment
stuff.
Yeah, if I'm going to critique what's on at 7 p.m, I've got to know what's on at 7 p.m.
I know.
There you go, sir. That was last on in 1997. Hey, you concerned about text messaging? So we've got about 15 minutes to go. I'm interested in...
There's a time limit?
I like to go about an hour and 20.
Okay. They're very patient listeners of yours, because, one of the is supposed to be short, shareable, snackable content.
No, this is the slow food of information.
Yeah. I really do believe in slow journalism. I really do.
There's a guy, Rogan, who... To me, he's an MMA commentator. He is a stand-up comedian. He is just a bunch of sort of quite random stuff put together. His podcast is one of the most downloaded in the world now, and he does like 4 a week. Some of them are 3 hours.
Shoot!
But it's just
But he must be interesting.
Yeah, and they could go anywhere. We're going to be Statler and Waldorf for the last 10 or 15 minutes.
But seriously, MMA, I mean, if he's going to talk MMA, he's going to have MMA audience.
That's the bit where it's not because I've anything against MMA, I just don't know enough about it, and I can't say I've watched much of any of it.
Life's too short.
But he'll have like a biochemist on one week, and then he'll have a stand-up comedian, and they'll talk about boobs, and then he'll have an ex-CIA operative, and then he'll have, and now he's at a point where it's so popular, and you look on iTunes for New Zealand, and it's one of the most downloaded podcasts. It's up there with The Edge and ZM. This guy I've told you about you had not heard of till this point. So yeah, he's at this point now where he just sort of gets whoever he asks will generally come on. Just before I lose you, I wanted to ask about, because you often, you're asked to comment in the media as I guess an expert, not a talking head, but you're asked to comment on issues regarding journalism and information and so on.
Yeah, it's funny.
Do you ever? Oh no, go on.
It's funny that people ring me up and journalists ring me up. And I'm certainly not the best necessarily of all the journalism academics in New Zealand to comment on the media. Not at all. There are some just absolutely brilliant people who work in my field, but I'm
You're just the one that answers your phone.
I'm just the one who answers my phone. So I do end up doing a fair amount of comment, and they try these things that I used to try. They ring up and they go, "My story would be so much better if they had the voice of an expert in it." So
all the...
So it's like, it used to be...
You ever just laugh?
I do. I said, don't try that one on me. I was taught that when I was 17. Ring up the guy at the university and tell them you need an expert, because it panders to their ego.
Yeah.
And then they laugh and say, oh, will you do it anyway?
Yeah,
so I go, yep.
Yeah.
So I do tend to comment a bit.
Do you have, I was interested there, like with, you're representing an organisation and so on, do you have to vet it with anyone, or is it just more like exercise common sense when you comment?
Well, I think if I went too far,
yeah,
I might end up with an email from the Vice-Chancellor or something. But
today could be your day, Greg. Today could be your day.
No, there's no... Look, AUT is a really great university in so many ways, and one of the things is I've never, ever had anybody in the smallest way try to control my academic independence.
Well, then that speaks to the heart of what our organisations are supposed to be, so that's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
But at the same time, if you're a muppet and you mess that up, then it's understandable.
But isn't it great that you might get told off afterwards if you mess it up?
Yeah.
But they don't try and control you before you go out.
Yeah.
And that, otherwise it's not a university. Yeah. And I wouldn't work there.
No.
So, no, I've never gotten to sort of super trouble over it. I think the most controversial thing I did was start a Give a Little Fun.
That was next. Thank you.
That was it?
Yeah.
Let's segue into that bit then.
Talk a little bit about this. Bradley Ambrosi, the Teapot, whatever it's called.
So Bradley Ambrose was a cameraman, a freelance cameraman who was filming the John Banks, John Key Cup of Tea in Newmarket several years ago, before the 2011 election. Yeah, because is it that long ago? Anyway, the Prime Minister then made very insulting comments about Bradley afterwards.
Defamation, as we're speaking of.
Yep. And Bradley's work started drying up. I have to be clear, I've never actually met Bradley Ambrose. I just emailed him and said...
Never even met him after you did all of this?
No, not at all. In fact, he emailed me to say thanks and he'd like to tell me how much the settlement was, but he couldn't. Yeah. So he was completely straight with his confidentiality that he signed with the Prime Minister. But in the end, I don't know to what amount it influenced the Prime Minister, but there was a sort of public thing bubbling up against him, and I think the fact that we started
against who, Bradley?
No, against John Key around that time. Because it was clear that Bradley's career had been affected, and John Key didn't have any ability to prove that what he said was true. What he'd said was he'd compared him with the journalists who hacked Millie Dowler's cell phone at the News of the World. That was a bit rough. The guy didn't have a chance to get his recording device off the table before he was pushed out of the cafe by the PM security people. So he inadvertently recorded their conversation, which he then gave to them. So,
and then, to be clear, your involvement was that you, having not met him, thought about,
a journalist friend of mine, I have to be honest, friend of mine rang one day and said, hey, you'd be in a good position to do this. We can't do it because da-da-da-da.
And you said, don't try that before. I was taught that when I was 17. And then they said, will you do it? And you said, yeah, I'll do it.
Something like that. So I thought about it, and then I thought that is something I could do and something I would very much like to do, to bring public attention to the fact that journalists are under attack a lot, and you can't have somebody's career ruined by a politician who can't prove it.
But we still haven't told everyone what you did.
I started a Give a Little page, and we raised money so that Bradley could sue the Prime Minister. Now, what happened was... we raised... He needed $38,000, I seem to think. Yeah. And I think we raised the 8. so it wasn't huge. But it was about the publicity more than that. And the NBR,
Totally. And that might have.
rang
Do
me
you
and-
think that might have
might have
led
just
to where it all ended up?
It would have been one of the things that
Yeah.
added pressure to the Prime
Yeah.
Minister, who decided that he didn't want to go to court,
Yeah,
where he would have had to put his hand on a Bible and swear to tell the truth.
yeah. And the NBR phoned you and...
Oh, lots of people phoned me. The NBR, the Radio New Zealand,
Yeah.
the Herald, and just ringing to see what it was all about, really. But it got enough publicity, I think, that it might have been one of the things that helped John Key decide that the tide was turning against him on this issue.
Yeah.
And he agreed to settle with Mr. Ambrose, but I don't know for how much.
But settle, I don't... Because why would they settle if they weren't already in court proceedings? Do you mean just settle to get off his back? Oh, settle to don't sue me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
And
interesting.
settle out of court.
Yeah.
It was going to cost him $38,000 just to go to court.
And that would have probably only been the first part of the process of going
Yeah,
to court.
that
because
would-
someone like Key would have lawyers that would
Yeah.
intentionally drag it out
Yeah.
to make it financially...
Probably. So, that was a slightly high-profile thing I did that I felt quite proud of.
And then coming full circle to what where we originally started with, that was like you kind of insinuating you maybe got a little bit of heat for doing it from somewhere in the organisation. No,
No,
not at all.
No, not even a murmur from above. I was just allowed to take that stand in defence of journalism against the political field, which is, as we know, much stronger than the journalistic field. And sometimes you've just got to fight back, and we did. I don't really know. It was like one blow in round 7. It wasn't the defining thing.
I think having revisited it today and looking around at the coverage it got, I think it must have been a contributing factor because it was covered.
It was, yeah.
It was covered a number of places, and a number of places with quite different demographics in terms of...
It's such a fascinating process. I can hear your listeners now. They're going, well, what happened to the money? What happened to the money? We didn't need to give it to Bradley because the Prime Minister decided to settle out of court. And Give a Little is... I just have to give them a plug here. They're amazing.
So they refunded all?
They just refund the payments.
Is that a New Zealand one? Is that the New Zealand one? Give a Little?
Yep. Give a Little.
So they don't do some bullshit PayPal transfer fee?
And not only that, but we could have set it up. There was some discussion about whether we would keep the money and donate it to the New Zealand Centre for Investigative Journalism, but I didn't have the okay from all those donors to do that.
Yeah.
I just said, no, I would much rather it went back to the people.
Yeah, totally.
But there were some very interesting comments that came through with the donations, I can tell you that.
Good, positive comments. Obviously, if you're going to give money, you're not going to be a muppet.
Well, no, there was some pretty negative comments about the Prime Minister.
Oh, okay. So in closing, I just looked at my notes again. Good convo when you only look at your notes a few times. I haven't a lot of notes.
We've just been noodling along.
I like to wing it. As I talked to Kirsty Johnston about fake news, and I suggested to her, and she actually followed up after the mics went off, that she'd agree with me, that there's always kind of been some... manifestation of fake news around, and that I think, what did I put to her? That it's I think the bigger issue is about media, about being able to suss what the media is doing, almost being it should be a compulsory thing in perhaps secondary school or so on. So what I'm getting at is not very. This is a wobbly way of getting to it. Is that maybe it's more about the fact that more audience members need to be able to suss good information from terrible information.
I think that's really, really important. I would love to see a civics class at high school, a compulsory civics course that included...
And what would civics be? Stuff like...
it would not just be how society works, how the government works, the democratic principles of our electoral system and all that. Some essential training in how to read the media, so media studies. So you understand. I mean, I don't know how many young people grow up now thinking the media is just this force for good. They don't understand that it's actually owned by various corporations that have their own interests.
Do you think it would be fair to say...
Because when I grew up, I wasn't aware of that. It wasn't like that then.
When we talked about that with engagement before, you said you were kind of political and so on and da-da-da, but not really when you were younger. Like, I sort of get it with our age students. Like, when I was at uni, I was 17 to 20. I wasn't... The last thing on my mind, as I say, was following those... This is bad. I did a first year New Zealand politics course taught by some really fascinating people when I look back on it.
Joe Atkinson.
I got my vote that year. I didn't vote.
Yeah.
I must have had
You
something
told
on
me
that
this.
weekend,
Yeah,
you
you
know.
told me
But
this.
I get it. I get it. It's not being you can't say, the young people today, they're so not engaged. That's just young people.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
The anomaly is the guy who's sort of like swinging the ACT or the Labour flag or whatever from 16 onwards. You know,
You got to worry about him.
yeah.
The ACT always has some 17-year-old advocate, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. That's right. That's why I picked ACT first, because it felt like something I'd seen a few way before. So I was going to say, do you think it'd be a fair statement with that idea of a civics course or some kind of ability to critique the media being taught early on? Do you think if that had been in the States schooling system that Trump would have got elected?
What a good question. I don't know.
It's a
whether
totally
it is.
loaded question,
I don't
because you know
whe-
what- yeah,
I don't know whether it is or isn't, or to what degree and what areas. Because I mean, they've just got a free market for education over there. One school is entirely different from another. So
I hear this is
saying.
Fantasyland stuff.
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
hear
saying,
what you're saying.
if the voting public
Were better
had been through
educated
about media, about civics, about how the media functions, would a Trump have got through? But then you could, because that's a big problem we face, right, with the whole.
What I don't understand is how he's managed. We've all got our criticisms, especially those of us with critical perspectives on life, but we've all got our views of mainstream media. But what I don't understand is how I just fail to understand how people can fall for the fake news thing. What is he saying, that everything CNN publishes is wrong?
Well, it's
not up to a politician to decide what is news and what isn't. Is he talking about lies? I mean, I don't think he could put his finger on it. I think he's just a bluffer and a liar.
Well, it's back to what we were saying. It's people not having learnt anything other, or it's either they haven't learnt or they're lazy. But it's just people constantly taking everything at face value and not, I don't know how you do it, but say a certain, I can't think of an example, a certain topic comes up for me that I'm not familiar with, I will immediately, without even my brain registering I'm doing it, have 4 or 5 pages open.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some people aren't taught to do that. It's not belittling them or anything. It's me saying the completely opposite. It's really kind of sad that people don't. A number of people. Yeah.
I just don't know if there was a civics class, whether that would alter Trump's ability to get people to vote for him on emotion and anger. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think even if they understood the media systems better, I still think that because he's not appealing to something rational. He's appealing to something angry. He's appealing to all those people who don't understand why their lives are like this.
Yeah, everyone totally shocked and mortified by the last president. That's right. Their anger towards that. There's so much to it. You're right. It's like all the
I heard something
heavens collide and the perfect storm.
I heard something quite interesting on national radio this week. I'm not supposed to be listening to national radio because I'm supposed to be finishing my doctorate. But that first hour in the morning between 9 and 4 p.m. when you just can't work, you
yeah.
They.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, there was some,
that's why you said there's
exactly.
a podcast. That's before you said, because he's the first person who said it. You go, does it only go an hour and 20 minutes?
No, but I heard something on national radio about left and right not being a particularly useful distinction these days.
I've been saying on the podcast, I'm sick of hearing about it.
Yeah, I'm sick of hearing it.
It's just dividing people.
It's just dividing people. But how about this as a division? The world is now made up of the somewheres and nowheres.
Oh.
No, you're a nowhere.
Yeah, I'm a nerdy nowhere.
So the somewheres are people, they voted for Trump.
Yeah.
They're connected to place.
Yeah.
They're connected to religion.
Yeah.
And they're connected to identity.
Yeah.
And because of those things, they can't understand those of us who aren't, and I'm a nowhere.
You're connected to place. You're really involved with Waiheke.
I could live anywhere. I could live anywhere.
Oh, I know what you mean. I totally get it, because I was going to say, how can you say they're connected to place if their land's been foreclosed, they've got no work where they are, but they're connected to that place because they go back generationally there.
That's right.
To
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm connected to
interesting.
Waiheke, but my parents didn't live there. My grandparents didn't live there. I don't.
That's oh my god, yeah. Oh my god, you're right. Like I don't even have that cultural heritage of like.
That's
I'm
right.
sort of
So
a
there's
mongrel.
the somewheres and the nowheres, and the nowheres.
I'm a nerdy nowhere.
That's you and me.
Yeah.
We can live anywhere. We have liberal attitudes to life.
Yeah.
We have an education. I'm not saying that none of the somewheres are educated. Just the things that distinguish us are that we are mobile, educated, liberal, and so this was suggested as a better way of dividing the world.
But then with Trump, don't you have a nowhere running the somewheres? I imagine he could live anywhere.
Make America great again.
Yeah.
No, he's a place. I don't know. I don't think he is one of the people who voted for him. I think he knew how to appeal to them.
Yeah.
But as soon as he got,
he's a salesman. He's the greatest. He's the greatest like huck salesman.
Yep.
Medicine. Snake oil.
He's
used car.
Willy Loman with power.
Yeah. And he's, you look at his history there. He's 10,000 times should have, he's messed up and ruined a business, but he knows how to make all that work.
Yeah, absolutely.
We ended on Trump. Hey, thanks. You off back to Waiheke now?
It's been fun, and
it has.
Thanks for having me along. And I don't know if I've been able to add much, but
you've added 80 minutes at least of mediocre to
that's
okay
right. It doesn't
content.
matter what the content is today, just as long as it's got video.
We've done well then.